I think my presentation you gotta do.
Really?
I know. Saved by the bell. All right, it's 5 o'clock. I will call the this meeting of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee to order. Today we acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. We are thankful to share in the special spirit of this place, rich in the energy of Mother Earth, our ancestors, and the love of all creation. I'll look for a motion to adopt the agenda, that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for January 22nd, 2019 be adopted as presented. So moved. Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Coney. All in favor? That is carried. Any declarations of pecuniary interest around the table? Seeing none at this time, if you find yourself in that position as we go through the agenda, please let me know. And deputations, we have a deputation or none today? I don't see any. So then we'll go right into staff reports, item 5.1. Want to carry that? Okay. I'm going to call Linda Davis forward. That's the Collingwood OPP policing contract proposal. And Linda Davis is the contract analyst. Welcome, Linda. And welcome, Terry, I've lost your title. Sorry, Terry Ward.
Oh.
And acting
Allow
staff
me.
sergeant. Sorry. Well, maybe you can take us through them. Sorry. And Police Services Board, Krista Wallcraft, and I apologize. I should have written that down. But I'll give it over to you, Linda, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Davis and I'm a contract analyst with the Municipal Policing Bureau in Aurelia for the Ontario Provincial Police. Joining me today is Sergeant Catherine Ross, who's assisting me, and then also we have Staff Sergeant Terry Ward, who I believe should be acting inspector at this point in time. He's your detachment commander at this moment. And I'm just going to test this. Perfect. Alrighty. Thank you very much for having me come today. I'd like to speak to you today about the billing process that the OPP has and about the annual statement that has been issued to the town of Collingwood. I plan to cover how the OPP produces their billing, specifically for your new council members and perhaps for your experienced council members also, to get a better understanding on how we derive the costs. It is a cost recovery method. And it's relatively new. It was implemented in 2015 when the new billing model was introduced at the recommendation of the ministry and also the Auditor General. I also have with me some comparisons for Collingwood and some details about the 2019 contract renewal. Oh, was going earlier. I've lost my light. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Alrighty. So the budget for the Ontario Provincial Police in its entirety for the fiscal year of 2017-2018 was $1.134 billion. And of that total budget, 65% of it was allocated to our provincial services. The Ontario Provincial Police is a provincial service which has mandates for provincial highways, provincial lands, and certain types of investigations and assistance. The other remaining 35% of our budget we recovered from municipalities for the policing that we do within their municipalities. And the slide that's on here will show you some of the services that go, whether they're on the provincial side of the house as items that we provide to all municipalities with no cost recovery. Those would be the items on the right-hand side of the screen: traffic safety, major investigations, intelligence, specialized response teams, community safety area, and also our auxiliary policing. The areas on the left-hand side are the services that we're providing to municipalities, including the staff at the detachment, including your frontline constables, your administrative staff, and then there are support positions that are worked into the recovery method to cover the costs for our dispatchers, prison guards, training, and several of the other areas that are corporate areas within the organization. In the last 5 years, since the billing model was implemented, it's been relatively stable. There have been increases in the amount that we have recovered each year. There has also been increases in our jurisdiction, and it's kind of changed. So in 2015, we anticipated recovering approximately just over $390 million. When we prepare our statements, we prepare them, so for example, your 2019 statement was prepared near the end of 2018. So when it's prepared, it's actually an estimate for the year. And then when the 2019 year is over, it will be reconciled the following year to actuals in certain areas of the bill. And I'll go through those as we go through the presentation. So we always talk about estimates and reconciled amounts because we initially estimate the money that we will recover, and then it is actually reconciled after the fact. The bar in blue is the money that we've recovered from municipalities in the province for each year. And then in green is the average price per property for all of the properties in the province that we police in municipalities. So we started off with approximately $354 per property is the average price throughout the province. And that has stayed relatively stable throughout the last 5 years. We're still in the 350s, although we are up to 359 this year as the per property cost. The purpose for revising the billing model, which was introduced in 2015, was basically based from recommendations from the Auditor General. And if you look at the diagram on the left-hand side of the screen, each one of those lines is meant to represent a municipality. And there was extreme diversity in the prices that municipalities were paying. Some of them were paying as low as $8 per property, and some of them were paying as high as $800 per property. So through the Auditor General and also through several other stakeholders that had concerns, including AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, they really wanted more explanation and more transparency to the costs and how they were allocated. With the implementation of the billing model in 2015, you see we eliminated that great big gap, and now there still is a gap between the highest and the lowest paying, but it's dependent on many different aspects and characteristics of the community, and we've narrowed it so that it's not such a broad, diverse gap in the prices. So for this reason, we felt it's a more fair billing model because it allocates the costs more effectively, and it's transparent with many of the presentations that we do. It's easier to explain. We're very public with the fees that we're charging the municipalities, and they're all posted on our internet website and accessible to everybody at any time. So since 2015, the majority of your policing statement is divided into two categories. The first category being base service, the second category being calls for service. I'm going to speak first about the base service. It is a per property fee, basically to have a police service available. So it means having your building, having your officers, having the equipment that they need, the vehicles that they need, and being able to respond 7 days a week, 24 hours a day at any time. And there are many proactive pieces that are included in this base service cost. Our base service cost this year is just over $189 per property, and that cost is consistent for all municipalities in the province. The calls for service portion is more a second portion that we recover, and we, through our determinations, see how much money we have to recover out of the calls for service portion. And if we say we're going to recover let me just take a look here. If we're going to recover approximately $156 million through calls for service for all the municipalities that we police, each municipality will pay their percentage of the workload of that $156 million. And you'll be able to understand that a little bit better when I show you the actual statement in a further slide. But the base service is the sort of flat rate fee that is consistent throughout the province. And then the calls for service, each municipality pays a percentage which is equivalent to their percentage of reactive calls for service. And it's based on a 4-year average to help eliminate any spikes that may occur in any given year. There are additional costs that could make up approximately 10% or give or take on a municipality's statement. And these are costs that may or may not pertain to a particular municipality. Those costs are for overtime, court security, cleaning and caretakers, accommodations, enhancements, and prisoner transportation. While all municipalities will pay a certain fee for prisoner transportation, not all municipalities have enhancements or have courts in their jurisdiction, so some of them are exempt from those costs. I might also add that the calls for service portion is basically for reactive calls for service in your community. They're not for proactive policing, which is part of your base services cost. This next slide shows the fees that have been charged to the town of Collingwood for the last 5 years. And you'll see we have reconciled 2015, 16, and 17. We have not reconciled 2018, but since the year is now over, we will be doing that later on, and that will reflect on your next statement. You'll see that your property count is increasing slightly. The source of our property count data is from MPAC. They provide that to us. And you'll see that under the capped column is the price that Collingwood was paying each year. And on the far right-hand side, in the second last column, is the price per property that has worked out to. And next to them, you'll see the OPP average cost per property. So I'd say it's pretty obvious that the town of Collingwood is slightly above the average price in the province for their policing services. Okay. So I have a statement, and I've provided a package to most of you, or a document in your package. It is called the Policing Proposal. And if you turn to page 3, this will basically talk to the services and the delivery that we provide to the town. And it's a summary there that's available for you to read, and it talks about our service delivery. Next to that, if you then turn to page 6, the slide says page 5, but that's an old one. I did change it this morning. I think your handout will say it's on page 6. Page 6 looks like this, and I'm going to put it up on the screen shortly here. And it's actually the statement for 2019. So it's a little bit difficult to read on the screen here, but hopefully you can see it in your packages. So currently, the town of Collingwood, with household and commercial and industrial properties, has just over 12,000 properties. So we take our cost per property, which is $189.54, and we multiply your properties by that, and the town is being billed $2.3 million for base services. And again, that's basically to have a police force here, available, ready to do what they need to do any time of the day or night with all the equipment that they need. The second portion shows the calls for services, and we mentioned that the OPP needs to recover $156 million in calls for services. So we take the entire reactive calls for all of the municipalities in the province, and we measure what the percentage is that are Collingwood's alone. And if we look at all of the calls in the province, the reactive calls for the municipalities we police, Collingwood's portion of that makes up 1.48% of the calls. As a result, you're billed 1.48% of the $156 million. which turns out to be $2.3 million. If we were to divide that by the number of properties, you'll see it works out to a per property cost of $189.49. But that's not how it's derived. That per property cost is just there for you to break it down to see how we calculate the per property cost. We estimate that there'll be approximately $187,000 worth of overtime in the coming year. That is based on 2 years of previous data as to what we've seen in the past. And Collingwood does have one enhanced officer. An enhanced officer is someone that's dedicated full-time to doing policing work for the town only and not doing any of our provincial work. And the cost for your contract enhancement now is $174,000. And I just might add that the current enhancement is a school resource officer. What comes along with that is the commitment that that school resource officer will provide 1,417 hours of service to the town of Collingwood exclusively. If we do not meet those hours of service, then there is a credit that is applied. If we exceed those hours of service, it just stays status quo. There is no extra charge. Prisoner transportation is a per property flat rate that is charged to all municipalities. So it's basically the $2.27 charged multiplied by your number of properties to come up with the $27,000. So the estimated cost for 2019 is $5.2 million. We see that that's slightly above last year. If we were to calculate the per property cost, it's $425 per property and 86 cents. Last year, your per property cost was only $419, so there's been an increase of almost $6 per property. You'll also see that there's an adjustment, and this is a reconciliation from 2017, and the specific reconciliation is again due to your enhanced officer, where she did not fulfill the 1,400 hours in the calendar year. As a result, there was a credit of $106,000 provided. So that's removed off of this annual statement to give you a grand total of $5.1 million for 2019. This billing package is actually 24 pages long. You've only seen the top page that goes with it. For the calls for service, we actually list all of the calls for service for the 4 years and where they are and how they're being, where the calls, like which calls are driving the cost, so to speak, and you'll see the 4-year average for that. So it's a very detailed statement that we provide, which has increased the transparency of our billing process. I'll speak briefly about enhancements. I did mention that some municipalities have enhancements, some don't. The town of Collingwood does have one full-time enhancements. Only municipalities that are in a formal contract with the Ontario Provincial Police are eligible for enhancements. And it's, again, for a specific dedicated purpose, and Collingwood has their school resource officer. When a municipality chooses to have an enhancement, the enhancement is in place for the duration of the contract. And at this point in time, Collingwood's policing contract has expired as of December 31st, 2018. We are looking for a renewal, and you can renew for either 3, 4, 5, or 6 years. The choice of term is up to the town of Collingwood themselves to decide. However, we very strongly recommend that you avoid having your bill come due in an election year. So we kind of would recommend that you avoid a 4-year contract, but people still do take those sometimes and whatnot. It's just a steeper learning curve for the new council coming in. Very much of the information that I've provided to you is available on the website. I also, there are many resources that we have at opp.ca. I also might note that we do list the prices for all of our municipalities over the years and what their price is per household if you needed to do a comparison and to see. There are many resources available, and as a contract analyst specifically for Central Region, I am also your go-to person to answer any questions about the billing. If there's no, that's the gist of the billing there. I could go into further detail. I could speak for an hour on this, and I'm sure you don't want to sit here for an hour and listen to it, but I'd be very happy to answer any questions now or also at a later date if you think of them.
Thank you, Linda. Councilor, any questions? This time, Deputy Mayor Hall.
Through you, Mayor Saunderson, to Davis, you mentioned specific to this year-end adjustment of $106,000 for the community officer. And why wasn't that fulfilled? Is it a program that just started in the previous year, or?
The officers that work in our detachments, because we are a provincial police service, we have officers that will do our provincial work and also officers that do municipal work, but we don't segregate our officers to do just one or the other. We work on an integrated service delivery model. So any officer at any time could be working in the municipality, in the town, or in an area surrounding that area. Your school resource officer actually did fulfill 1,300 hours in 2017 out of the 1,400. But we also reduce any of the calls for service that they attended or generated because we bill for calls for service. So once we reduced her calls for service, because we don't want to ding you twice, so to speak. You're already paying $170,000 to have the dedicated officer. So if she generates lots of reactive calls for service or attends many reactive calls for service, we don't want to be charging for those also. So we remove the hours allocated to those calls from her commitment of 1,400 hours, and it's laid out on, I believe, on the back of one of the pages of your statement. I do have it here. So she only ended up filling approximately, I think it was about 700 hours once we reduced her calls for service. So that portion is what was billed for the enhancement.
Go ahead.
A question of general interest. The provincial policing, whether you're here in Collingwood or in the detachment, say at South Bruce Peninsula or Downsview, the type of policing is extremely different for those various regions. Just out of interest, what latitude does the local detachment have to determine how they're going to allocate their resources, their officers, in the types of policing, whether it be physically getting out of their vehicle and walking the beat, doubling up in vehicles as you see in some municipalities, to other types of resources like the Marine unit that we've got here?
So the Marine unit would be a provincial resource. Because you're in a Section 10 contract with the Ontario Provincial Police, you still have a Police Services Board, and basically the Police Services Board is the liaison with the detachment commander to decide what the priorities are for your community and where the policing should be focused on. It's through the Police Services Board that latitude comes from. Municipalities that are not in a contract with the OPP that perhaps are policed under what we call a 5.1 agreement under the Police Services Act, they don't have that legislated requirement for a Police Services Board. So it's based more on the detachment commander's expertise and knowledge. But it's through your Police Services Board that latitude would come in terms of where the focus needs to be in what areas of the town.
Councilor, any questions? Sorry, Councilor McLeod.
Through your worship to Ms. Davis, thank you so much. I have a question, two actually. One about some numbers that are on page 6 of the package that you gave us. And I'm pretty sure that I'm not understanding this, which hence the question. So calls for service, total all municipalities, 156,778,914. And in Collingwood, we are responsible for 1.4859% of all of the calls that happen across Ontario, or
That's the percentage of calls that happened in Collingwood, was 1.48%.
Of the 156 million.
Yes,
So,
not of 156 million calls.
okay, that's where I was getting lost.
Okay, so I mentioned that it's a very detailed billing package, and I have a copy here. I'm just gonna pull it out. I know I have it somewhere. Kat, I might have it in my binder. Okay, what you don't have a copy of is the entire statement. But if you were to get a copy of it through your CAO or through your clerk, there is a page 5 of 24. I'm not quite sure what's the best way to show you this, but there's page 5, and there's also page 3 and page 5 of the entire billing process are actually very useful in understanding where the costs come from. So first of all, I'll let you take a look at this, but I'll explain it first. So because different types of call can take different time commitment in order to investigate it, we've divided all of our calls into 9 work groups. So they're a billing work group, and associated with each work group is a time standard as to how long it takes to investigate. And that time standard is derived from our activity reporting system. So officers on a daily basis report where they're working, what they're doing, and for how long. And from that, we can determine how long it takes on average to investigate that type of offense. So out of these billing work groups, we convert your 4-year average of calls into weighted hours. And the weighted hours come up with the allocation. So I'll show you on this sheet. 100% of the weighted hours is 1.6 million hours. Collingwood had 23,000 of those weighted hours. And as I mentioned, we know that we have to recover 156 million from the calls for service. So basically, that's our 100%, and 1.48% of that is turns out to the $2.3 million. And I'll just let you see this. Thank you. So these are all your calls for service.
Yeah.
That's your average. We multiply it by the time standard. It gives us the weighted time. This is the total time. This is your percentage of the total, and that's your cost of the total. And that is on page 24 of the actual billing statement.
Thank you. Through your worship, I have another question as well. Ms. Davis, you said that we're about $75 per household per year above the provincial average. Can you, off the top of your head, tell me a couple of municipalities which receive OPP services which are below average? I'm just trying to, like, are we a particularly crime-ridden area?
No, it's not that. It's probably because you're an urban, more of an urban center with larger properties. We do police a very large portion of rural Ontario. So it's the rural municipalities that probably bring the average down compared to the more urban, higher, more densely populated areas that would probably be above average.
Thank you.
For example, like Mulmer Township, East Garifraxa, Clearview, Springwater, I believe they're all below the 359 average cost per property.
Thank you.
Councillor Hamlin.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for such a complete analysis. Okay, so I just had a few questions. The overtime amount that we're showing for this year of 187,000 and change, what do we use overtime for?
Usually that's when an officer attends a call, and depending on the seriousness of the call and the time of day of the call, they could respond to a call very close to the end of their shift. So depending on whether it takes them beyond their shift hours or not, then that's usually what would incur overtime.
So this isn't policing at festivals or any of that?
No, it's not.
How does that show up? Or does it here, or is that a separate?
It probably depends on the nature of the event. For example, I'm not quite sure if you normally have municipal officers working at festivals. If they are, they're usually on a paid duty, and that's a separate charge. It's not included in the billing statements.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that the school resource officers, like the charge of 187,000 or 174,000 for basically a full-time position, is a lot more than the cost of a constable, uniform constable. Why is there a difference?
The cost of a uniform constable is approximately $100,000, but we also include the salary and benefits. So they'll have their statutory holiday payout, there'll be shift premium in there, and then also we also include, and it is again itemized on a separate page in your statement. In fact, you may have a copy of it on page 7 of your proposal.
Yeah.
So there is also a fee for all of the resources available to that officer. So you'll see that there's support costs that are given on a per FTE, and when I say FTE, I mean full-time equivalent.
I see the total at the bottom there.
And yeah, and then the ODOE is the ODOE that's required for that officer. So those are all generated at a per FTE cost, and those what boost it from $133 up to $174. And again, just for clarification, we've taken that $174,000, divided it by your number of properties, and you see that that's actually costing you approximately $14 per property for that enhanced officer. And that again, remember, is not reconciled at this time. You're being billed that amount for 2019, and next year, when the year is over, that will be reconciled to see whether or not all of the hours were met or not. We also have sometimes not just one officer doing the job. So we may have 2 people fulfilling the enhanced role, although it's only 1 FTE, because like they have to take vacation too sometimes. So there'll be someone else filling in there. So that's why we measure it in hours.
Okay, thank you. My last question is just the philosophy behind, I think at this point, I think I heard you say that the cost of guards is shared, among all the municipalities in the province, the guards at the prisons, is that right?
No, the prisoner transportation cost is shared, but guards are not shared.
The guards at the facilities are not shared.
That would, if you're thinking of correctional facilities, that's completely separate.
Okay.
Where we're talking more about guards is in the courthouses. And municipalities that don't have a courthouse obviously don't have guards that, they don't have the need for guards.
So because we have a court, I know you explained and I see it here, we have court security.
Correct.
But that's all we're paying towards,
Correct. And there are grants also that are out there that are available that the town of Collingwood, I believe, can take, if they don't already, can take advantage of for court security and prisoner transportation.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I have a few, and I sit on the Police Services Board, and we certainly appreciate all the great work that goes on in our community. And I just want to make sure I understand the funding formula. 65% is based on base allocation, and that's the same across the province. Is that correct?
I would think, I don't know where you got the 65% from. Okay.
I'm looking at the.
That one slide.
Yes.
65% of our budget is for our provincial services. 35% of it we recover. However, maybe you should repeat your question, because I think I just lost track of the question.
Okay, so I'm looking at the pie graph.
Right.
Which I think was page 3 of the presentation, then
Yep.
going over to, I don't know that it's numbered, it's maybe page 7 or 9, and it talks about the breakdown. So it says base service,
Yes,
and that's done on a municipal house count? Like that's a
Correct.
fixed cost, so that's the same across the province?
Yes,
that's
it
the
is.
charge?
Yes.
Okay. So then, assuming, if I'm correct, that that's 65% of the overall costing?
no,
It's
no.
not.
There's, so that 65-35 is our split in our budget between our provincial mandate and our municipal mandate.
Okay,
Okay? The actual split between base and calls for service, and I'm glad you bring this up, because that is how we determine how much we're gonna how much we're gonna recover of our money through the base and through the calls for service, and that amount is actually falls in the 53% base services to about 47% calls for service.
okay. So thank you for that clarification, because that's, I guess what I'm trying to drill down on is why we're above the average. I think our residents would probably wanna know why we're above the average by approximately $65 or $75. So the base service, that's consistent across the province.
Correct.
And then the calls for service, which is variable, dependent on how many calls we have here in Collingwood. And there's a portion of that that's weighted depending on the length of the call.
Correct.
Okay, so that
And
number.
then plus you also have your enhancement, which is another $170,000 on there.
Right, and we got actually a credit or reimbursement of $106,000 for last year because.
That's
we
from
didn't do it.
2017.
So that carries forward. So I really was just interested in the numbers then, because it seems to me that a large portion of the reason that we're over the average comes from our calls. Is that fair to say? Our reactive calls?
What probably would be best is if we were looking at other municipalities as a whole, to decide if that's what the deciding factor is. I think that the fact that you have more calls for service because you're a hub community, people will travel from outside of your area to come here for shopping and dining and things like that. So you'll tend to have higher calls for service, even though they're not necessarily generated by your residents. And if you were to compare that with some of the other municipalities, that's probably what you would see.
Okay. So, and I guess if I just looking at then, because you've very helpfully broken it out on a per property cost, and if we're $65 above the average, and our enhancement, the single enhancement is about $14.15 per household, then it still leaves us at about $50 then that's generated from the reactive calls essentially.
That's correct.
Okay. And as you've said, that's likely because we, I don't know that we'd consider ourselves urban, but we're not rural. And
Yes.
that we have people coming here for entertainment, tourism, and meals, and so that might generate a higher incidence of calls than our general population might otherwise generate. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes.
Okay, so it really then is a cost of being a tourism town.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that.
I might add that on page 3 of the package, which you don't have, but it's of your 24-page bill that that the clerk or the CAO has access to, we actually break out how much we're gonna recover from municipalities. And again, I say it's an estimate, and it's an estimate based on factual data from previous years. So it lists the full breakdown on how much we plan to recover, and for 2019, the total cost for the services is approximately $372, and that's where we break it into 53% of it we're recovering through base, because that's where we spend the majority of our time doing those services. And then the 47% is on the calls for service, because we spend approximately 40% of the officer's time in the reactive calls for service. So that page 3 shows that we're gonna recover $156 million from the calls for service and $216 million from that base property rate for all the municipalities in the province.
Yes,
Yes,
and then you gotta break that down by
Yes.
an individual municipality.
right, well, we actually break it down by the total municipal properties, right, because we have the municipal properties for all the municipalities we police. So when we divide that 216 million by 1.14 million, which is the number of properties, we end up with that base cost of 189.54. You don't have that page unless you have the full billing package, so it's difficult for you to perhaps comprehend right now, but it is on page 3 of your billing package that was presented to that came back in October to the CAO.
And I think you've answered this already, but I'm just gonna go back again, just so I make sure I'm clear. The 1.48% is actually based on our local calls, it's not averaged across the province, that's based on our local numbers.
That's correct, and it's based on your most recent 4 years, an average of your most recent 4 years
All right,
in the community.
thank you for that, that's helpful. Unless there's any other questions,
I have one coming out of one.
I'm gonna get
Your
to
worship.
these councillors first, and then I'll get back to you, Councillor Hamm, so Councillor Doherty.
Yes, so I assume that this is not the last time that we will be discussing this proposal. So I'm wondering if we can see the full report, the 23 pages.
So we will be receiving the report today and then voting on it at the next council meeting. So this is your opportunity to ask questions now.
So would it be possible for us to get that before the council meeting?
You're talking about the 24-page?
Yes,
Yes, I think clerk and, well, I'll look to the CAO. You should, will we be getting, council members be getting the 24-page package?
Yes, if that's the request.
we're making a number of references to pages that we're not seeing, so it would be very useful to see the full report. And in that full report, there's a comparison between our own municipality and some others, say perhaps in Simcoe County.
No, that information is available on our website
Okay,
at opp.ca.
and then you had recommended that we should consider renewing a contract for multiple years. So we're looking at just 1 year now. Would we be looking at another proposal for the full 3, 4, 5 years? Or will this be the same every year, or how will that work?
The contract term that we are offering is either 3, 4, 5, or 6 years. We don't offer a 1-year term, okay? However, the billing is calculated annually based on, estimated annually based on the previous workload and then reconciled. So the amount may change each year. It's not the same amount for each year of the contract.
Okay, so we make agreement to a contract for X number of years, and we know roughly what our costs year by year are going to be, but we actually don't know until they're fully reconciled.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And I think you'll see that on that one slide that showed the costs, that they've all been averaging between $438 per property back in 2015, and this year it's at $426 per property in the town of Collingwood.
Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just kind of piggybacking or in additional to Councillor Doherty's question on the renewal term in terms of years. There's really nothing incentivized in this. It simply comes down to municipal operations and what, from an OPP's perspective, I don't think there's anything that Linda would tell me that would, it's just up to what we're doing. Yeah.
It's a municipality's choice.
Okay. Councillor Hamm, you had some more questions.
Through you, Your Worship. My last question would just be, do you keep track of how many, or does our detachment keep track of the calls that are coming from our residents as opposed to from our visitors and tourists?
No, we do not.
Thank you.
All right, I think that's all the questions. Thank you very much for that presentation. I think what we'll do is put a motion on the floor to receive the proposal for the purpose of today's meeting. So let me put that into motion that we can have on the floor. That the content of the Collingwood OPP policing contract proposal be received. I get a mover and a seconder. Councillor
I so
Hamlin
move.
and Councillor Doherty. So unless there's any other questions or comments, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of receiving the report? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. You're certainly welcome to stay for the rest of our exciting meeting, but don't feel obligated.
Thank you.
Item 5.2, P 2019-6 Community-Based Strategic Plan. Recommendation is that staff report P 2019-6 be received and staff be directed to undertake a refresh of the community-based strategic plan, including a public participation component and an update to the key performance indicators. Can I get a mover and seconder to get that on the floor? Councillor Jeffrey and the Deputy Mayor Hall, and then I will look to Director Farrar for this, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. We're certainly happy to be back here and talking about our strategic plan one more year. As I believe, well, even probably the new councillors are aware of our strategic plan. It was passed by the previous council in September of 2015. And one component of our strategic plan was that we would have annual updates that would indicate where we were as far as achieving the performance indicators that the plan had set out. And so we had certainly one meeting in 2016, one meeting in 2017, and I believe even a number of the new members of council were in attendance at our 2018 meeting, which was held in November. So that meeting was held on the third floor of the library in November. We went through where we are with our key performance indicators. And what really has come to light is that perhaps not all, but a great many of the projects that were set out in our strategic plan have been achieved. And therefore, what staff are recommending is that we're due for a bit of a refresh on our strategic plan. And there would be a few steps that would be involved in this refresh. One of them would be setting out a survey again. I did attach to the staff report our previous survey, or the questions that we asked last time round. Perhaps they need some updating, but I think they would give members of council an idea of the kinds of questions that we would be asking. Last time we did have very good, or maybe not quite as good as our cannabis survey, but we had pretty good participation. I believe it was in the 700-800 people who we actually got to fill out our survey last time round. So it was certainly a good turnout. We did advertise that there was a survey on all of the various normal places that we advertise. It was on our website. It was available at all of our different locations in paper format. And we certainly did what we could to get the word out there, put it on our Collingwood page, and used whatever media avenues we could to ask people and get it filled out. And I think we gave people a couple of months. It wasn't quite as short a time frame as the cannabis one either, but we did give people a couple of months to fill it out. And then the thought would be that we would have new input from people as to what their interest is and what projects they believe this council should be undertaking. And the other aspect would very definitely be to meet with the members of this council, Mayor Saunderson, and see what, in their view, are the projects that this council should be undertaking. So that's kind of the process that we'd like to go through. I did put up, and just for those of you who may not know it, this is our vision statement that was adopted in the last strategic plan. And what it says is that Collingwood is a responsible, sustainable, and accessible community that leverages its core strengths, a vibrant downtown, a setting within a natural environment, and an extensive waterfront. This offers a healthy, affordable, and four-season lifestyle to all residents, businesses, and visitors. So what we would do is we would include what our current vision is and see whether there's any tweaking that would need to be done to that vision. Also we would identify the goals, and these are the goals that came up last time. And these are really the key areas that we felt should be our areas of concentration and what we should be working on, and see whether there's any changes there. Probably not likely. Those are still pretty important aspects of our community and something that I would think that we would still want to focus on. But they are accountable local government, public access to a revitalized waterfront, culture and the arts, healthy lifestyle, and support for economic growth. In no particular order, that's why they're in a circle. Anyway, thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions based on the information that's been provided at this point, and just let me know if there's any further information that might be necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Councillor Gord, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I just one question. I think this is an excellent document, and it just makes sense to be updating it and doing a check. But how will this proposed survey impact or cross-sect in our public process on the utility sale funds?
So there is obviously through your worship, a relationship between the consultation that we are proposing to undertake on the hydro share sales, and council will be receiving a report on the options imminently. There is, although there is a relationship, I think this strategic plan can happen independently. So we don't need to sort of do them at the same time. We can conduct the strategic plan review while at the same time we're doing the consultation on the budget and the consultation on the how we use the proceeds of the hydro share sales. So there's a relationship. I think what we need to do, because there's so many big strategic issues coming up over the next 4 or 5 months, I would suggest that we need to craft a communication strategy to help our public understand what it is that they're commenting on, and provide them with a sense of context. So a lot of this stuff will be coming out there, but we would need to help folks understand what it is that we're asking them to comment on. So this, I think, is a big piece, and I think this is the overarching piece. This is a piece that would set the agenda for the next 4 or 5 years. A strategic plan, as you know, is a very dynamic document and needs to be reviewed from time to time. So while we're doing this other stuff, I mean, I think we'll continue to do it, but this would be the cover piece, as it were, to try and guide the deliberations on everything else that we do. This is the big picture, the strategic, contextual document.
Again, thank you, Mayor. So I guess my head kind of went to that one was kind of would maybe provide resources for the bigger things that came out of that strategic planning. So I think you're correct. It will be important that people understand which part of the process they're having feedback in, and really not wishing to inundate them, although our residents seem to love giving input, so that probably won't be a problem. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so, and if I may add, through your worship, that, I mean, the other thing we need to think about is how we conduct this work, and how we do it. The survey is going to be one aspect of it, but I think direct public meetings with staff and with members of council and with the business community should be a part of that. And actually, who conduct the survey as well, who conduct the study would be an important part of how we do the refresh and the update. And I think perhaps this time we need to be a bit more ambitious, because while we've achieved some of the specific goals, I mean, I think there are other things that we're challenged by, and we'll have to sort of think about how we try and articulate those in the strategic plan and set ourselves some ambitious goals that we can actually strive to achieve.
Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. Through you to the CAO, do we have an anticipated timeline for this undertaking and final report?
So I think subject to council approval through you, your worship, we're planning on launching the survey as soon as possible. So we're looking at a refresh, I would say, in the next quarter. I mean, if we get council approval in the next couple of weeks, I think we'll go out and do a public consultation, but all of this will probably take time as well. And again, to Councillor Doherty's to Councillor Jeffrey's question, we've got to make sure that we understand the interrelationship between all the pieces that are going out, because you know, if there are too many pieces out there, we may not get the response and the attention that we're looking for. So the timing, I think, would depend on how we sequence these big policy pieces. The budget, I suspect, will be the next big step on the consultation piece, as well as the proceeds from the asset sale. And I think this would be part of that, but just because of timing, we would need to get a budget and the proceeds from the sale discussion on the public docket ASAP.
So it's reasonable to anticipate that this would be completed before the end of 2019?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And through you as well to the CAO, do we anticipate that we would engage a third-party consultant, or would we undertake this in-house?
So that's one of the options that we have before us, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Doherty. That's one of the options we have before us. Depending on the scale and scope of this exercise, you know, if it's a fairly scope exercise, it might be able to be accommodated in-house. But if you're looking at an exercise that's a bit bigger than that, then you may need to engage a third party. The other consideration as well is what I would describe as the so-called independence of the review. So there might be an interest in ensuring that, you know, staff might be seen as too close to it, or have a vested interest in this, and to somehow deter folk from that consideration. It might be useful for us to consider how best can we accomplish this within that context. So that's one of the options we're thinking about, is in-house versus a third-party consultant.
I agree, and there may be some wisdom in considering a consultant even just for the design work. Once that's completed, then we can implement, but just to make sure that we're undertaking the study in a empirical way.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Worship. Just to pick up perhaps on what Councillor Doherty was saying with regard to that survey, and then to touch on what you were saying with respect to the significance of the survey. Is it then reasonable to think that council might be able to see the survey prior to it being sent out to the residents?
Through your worship, of course. I mean, I think we could let council look at the survey that we propose to send out.
Thank you. And in addition to that, the last strategic plan that was put together, that was a third party that assembled that paper as well. And do you recall what the approximate cost was associated with that? I know that was a little while ago.
I'll defer to Nancy.
Thank you. Through Mayor Saunderson to Councillor Comey, it was about $50,000.
If I may ask then, prior to us undertaking the use of a third-party consultant, would that then come to council for approval?
It would, as part of our budget deliberations. So council will have an opportunity to review that option before we go to the market, if that's indeed what the recommendation is.
Okay, thank you.
seeing no other questions, then looking at the recommendation, right now the way it reads is it says that the report be received and staff be directed to undertake a refresh of the community-based strategic plan. Would it make sense to have that read that staff put together a report about what the options are for preparing that report and bring it back, or what would be the best way to do that? Given the comments around this table, I think this is a key roadmap, and as it was last time, and so we want to make sure that the results we get out of this process are solid and good guides for us for the next 4 years. So I'm wondering if that recommendation, if it's implicit in there, or we need to change that at all.
I think it's implicit in there that we're going to look at how we conduct this. I mean, this doesn't foreclose, in my view, the option of seeking a third party or an outside consultant. It's giving us direction to proceed with the update, and part of that might be engaging a consultant to help us in that exercise.
Okay. All right, any other questions around the table? Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I could point out, presently it doesn't have a timeline associated, as Councillor Doherty pointed out first. So perhaps we could add some sort of timeline to this, that staff is going to undertake this review, but we can anticipate certain elements within a certain time frame.
I'll look at the CO. If it's implicit that I think we're going to get a report back one way or the other about how we're proceeding, it's clearly a priority.
So through you, Your Worship, I mean, I would recommend that we don't put a timeline to it. Maybe we can put end of 2019 if we wish, but we'll bring it back well before 2019. My concern with putting too tight a timeline on it is that we may not be able to comply with that, and we have to come back to council with a report to tell you that we can't meet the timeline. So we've got 4 or 5 big pieces coming up, and so I guess the commitment is to try and bring this back to council as soon as possible. But if there is a need for a timeline, I would suggest a timeline be perhaps summer or fall of 2019. But clearly the expectation is that we'll bring it back before then. In fact, we would have to address this specific issue in our upcoming budget if we're going to get funding to go out and hire a third party to help us conduct the exercise. So, Councillor Comey, I anticipate that we'll be coming back to council in a matter of months, but I'd be hesitant to put specific timelines in there, because that might cause some concerns with not meeting it if it's too aggressive. But if you want to put a timeline, it will be summer or fall of 2019.
But just to, I guess, circle around on this in our discussions with Councillor Jeffrey's question about the sequencing, we're going to be working on the strategic plan update before we get the process on the feedback, on the investment of the proceeds or utilization of the proceeds, so that we have one driving the other. Is that the thought?
We could sequence it in such a way that we go out first with the strategic plan before we go out with the consultation on the proceeds from the asset sale. We could sequence it in such a way that that's what happens. But I think we've got to be prepared to have both of those documents out in the public realm at the same time. So while we may start with the strategic plan discussion, I think we would be reluctant to delay the discussion on the proceeds until after we've concluded the public consultation on the strat line. I think it can be reasonable to assume that both documents might be in the public domain for some overlapping period of time.
Okay.
So they're not sequential necessarily. They might be simultaneous, but this one would be obviously advanced ahead of the proceeds discussion.
If I could make a comment, please. If my understanding is correct, one of the large successful avenues last time this was pursued was engagement at the farmers market from the consultants. So the timing would be such that summertime might be an ideal time to catch residents again if we're looking at methods of engagement that were used last time that were successful. So timing in that respect might be imperative if we're trying to find ways to engage our residents. So I guess, again, speaking in favor timeline.
Noted. I think we're pushing. I mean, I think CEO has put this fairly clearly, and I think council's wish is that we get on this process very quickly and look at the ways we're going to do it. And that the idea being that the strat plan update come out prior to the funding, the use of the proceeds, on the assumption that a large number of the priorities in the strat plan would drive some of that agenda, but they may be out at the same time. There may be overlap. And the hope is that these will get going very shortly, understanding that there are a few large issues on staff's plate at this time. Deputy Mayor.
Comment to maybe sort of echo what you just said, Your Worship. If staff, in preparing the budget for 2019, if the thought is that no proceeds from the sales were being thought to be incorporated into the budget, that would then suggest that we're looking at 2020 possibly as the first opportunity to maybe start to use some of these funds. And given the level of work and the level of priorities between the budget, strat plan, proceeds of the sales, just a general comment, and staff can do what they wish, and others around the table can comment, but I have no problem sort of taking the foot off the gas as it relates to the work being done in consideration of the sale of the proceeds, and deferring that to a later time. I think I used the term before that this is really maybe a legacy transaction that we're dealing with, and therefore, I don't want there to be any pressure on staff to be moving these down the pipe, so to speak, when there doesn't really need to be.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, then I will call. Did we move in a second for this? Yes, we did. So it's on the floor. So then I will call a vote then. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. 5.3, PW 2019-2 pre-budget approval, water treatment plant expansion. And the recommendation is that staff report PW 2019-2 be received and council authorize the pre-budget procurement of engineering services for the R.A. Baker water treatment plant expansion. Can I get a mover and a seconder to get that on the floor? Deputy Mayor and Councillor Doherty. And then I will look to Director McDonald.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. The report is fairly detailed, and I'll try and go quickly through, briefly through the report. The water treatment plant was commissioned in 1999, and in conjunction with that commission, we entered into a 20-year agreement with New Tecumseh for the supply of water to New Tecumseh. We've been supplying them with various quantities of water ever since. We are currently negotiating that renewal of that agreement with staff at New Tecumseh. We've approached the previous council several times, and we're very, very close in terms of staff making a recommendation. We hope to be back to council in February, and we would take it to our respective councils at the same time. In addition to that water supply agreement, New Tecumseh has expressed interest in expanding their needs substantially. That would require an expansion of the plant. In addition, our plant in 2018 hit a trigger of a max day in the summertime of 80% capacity. So the demands on our plant during peak summer time was at 80% of its capacity, and that triggers a responsibility to start an environmental assessment for the redesign of the plant. The agreement with New Tecumseh, as I said, was in the works, but we have an agreement with them to proceed with the engineering component, and they'll pay their proportional share in advance of the agreement. It's going to take some time to complete the agreement. What we're working on now is just the terms of the agreement that we'll bring forward to council. Going to the market for an engineering consultant, it takes about a month and a half to go through that process, and we need budget approval before we can go to the market. We can't go to the market without budget approval. So what we're asking for here is for a portion of that engineering component to proceed with the class environmental class EA. And we have money in the reserves, plus commitment from New Tecumseh to pay their proportional share. That's about it, and if you have any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Questions around the table, council? Councilor Hamlin.
So I did read this today, and I could see that let me just ask you if I'm reading this correctly. That is that the expansion, the reasons for the expansion, as far as we know now, is 18% is for the town of Collingwood's purposes, and the balance of 100% would be for the other municipalities.
That is correct. That is correct.
And our 18%, and that's going to be that's an estimate, but we'll be fine tuning that based on an analysis of our current planning files and some determination of our growth over the period of the water treatment plant. Is that also true?
That's correct. Through the EA process, we'll take the results of our master servicing in terms of looking at our supply needs, and we'll plan for our needs over the next 20 years and do an expansion that has regard for that. Another important component is this plant is 20 years old, and there are components of it that are in need of renewal as well. So yes, it is an expansion, but in the process of expanding, they will be renewing, pumps and valves and some of the components that need renewing as well. So it's partly growth, but it's also partly renewal at the same time.
Okay, and then my other question, thank you for explaining that, is I noticed the report identifies that the amount we charge for the town of Blue Mountain for water is the same as we charge our own residents. But the report doesn't say anything about how we charge the town of New Tecumseh, unless I missed it. And I know that you mentioned this is all in negotiations now, but given that we have all the liability on these plants and the staffing and the maintenance and so on that goes with running a water treatment plant, is it fair to say that we will be in a position with New Tecumseh and other municipalities who are interested in our water, that our residents will be paying less than we're selling it for to others?
There are two different components. In terms of the town of Blue Mountains, their supply goes through our system. So they utilize not only the treatment plant, our pipes, our pumping stations, etc. And so in order to cost recovery, they make use of all of the components that a typical resident would make use of. New Tecumseh agreement is a little bit different in that they have their own pipe that comes directly out of the plant and their own pumps that pump it to their system. So the current agreement, arrangements in the current agreement is that they pay their cost for treatment and supply within that specific system.
I think where I'm going to, and through you, your worship, to our CAO, I've just seen municipalities over the years get into what I'll say more, private sector kind of agreements, and they typically, and this is no reflection, I have no idea what's in this agreement at all, but they typically don't do a very good job because they're not used to dealing with what I would say private sector thoughts around how they sell, important things. And so I'm just wondering if we're consulting, whether, you think we should be consulting outside outside on how to best structure how we're going to charge which seems to be a lot of what we're gonna be producing. You know, selling a lot of what we're gonna be producing.
Through you, Your Worship. The private sector model doesn't work for municipalities and other public agencies all the time. I mean, without getting into the details of the agreement we have with New Tecumseh, there are specific provisions in there that govern the amount of money that they pay for water they receive from us. And as the director indicated, they use some of their equipment to get the water to them. So we're looking at that agreement, and we're looking at how best we could finalize an arrangement with New Tecumseh where we are responsible for, our primary responsibility stays with us, which is the provision of water supply to our residents, and whatever they pay is taken out of that equation, so we can exit the agreement in a way that meets our financial obligations and financial commitments that we have made in the past, but also respect the spirit of the agreement. So that's a very vague way of answering the question, but I think that's because we're in the middle of negotiation with New Tecumseh on how we finalize that quote-unquote exit strategy. But also I think there's a history to this that council should be cognizant of, and there has been some information going back and forth. The agreement is not as straightforward as it seemed, and to the best of our ability, we're trying to, without compromising the supply of water to New Tecumseh, to try and maintain a relationship that works for them and works for us. But you know, full cost recovery is a model that we have used. To add on some private sector component, which would include a profit, would be something that I think we'd have to carefully consider before we proceed on that basis. But I think it is fair to say that we're not losing money as a result of the water we're supplying to either Blue Mountain or to New Tech. And our residents are not subsidizing either of those communities.
Okay, thank you.
Council, any other questions? I think this is, oh, sorry, Councillor McLeod.
Through you, Your Worship, to Director McDonald. We're talking about $300,000 right now, and there's $1 million sitting waiting for the rest of the project, or the rest of the environmental assessment. How, ballpark, what's our new water plant going to cost us when we finally finish it in 2022?
Ballpark, it's between 40 and 50 million. And so our portion of that would be 18% of that, based on current numbers. It will be part of our budget. It's part of our capital program, our 5-year capital program. It's been part of our previous 5-year capital program, and that will be presented as part of the budget. I think the goal here, in terms of moving forward, is to get permission to start that environmental assessment. As I said, the timing of the budget and approval of a budget is going to be a month, and it's going to take us a month and a half to get a consultant on board and get them started. And it's important, given the timelines of the need for the plant and the anticipation of the agreement, that we really want to get started on that component of it. The questions around plant cost and budget, we can certainly address it at budget time, but that's our anticipated. It's around that $45 million expansion cost.
And as a follow-up, if that's all right with you, Your Worship, do you remember offhand what the 20-year-old one cost? And in addition to that, do we think that there may be some provincial help? I know that we received some assistance because of a crisis with a thing called cryptosporidium 20 years ago. Is there a program in place provincially to assist with this sort of thing?
Through Your Worship, currently there's no programs that I'm aware of, and the other factor here is the majority of this plant expansion is for growth, both in our community and New Tecumseh, and not normally do they subsidize or grant for growth.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no other comments, I think it's clear that this is the first step in a long process, which is going to be costly. And the other thing to keep in mind is that since this plant was developed in the late 1990s, we had Walkerton. There is the Safe Water Drinking Act. There are other regulations that are coming into play. So as soon as we start to update some of this equipment, it gets it's no longer grandfathered, and we have to. It's a very different regime. And as we will be learning when we do the water liability around this table, we are individually liable for the water system in our community. So it is a big project. It's a very serious one. And this is the first step. And if I've read the report right, and I will look to Director McDonald for this, of the $300,000 for the cost of the EAR percentages, or our amount is about 54% based on the formula sharing. Is that correct?
54,000.
Yeah, 54,000, sorry, yeah. So we are working in conjunction with our partners in the region, and there is the previous agreement, and we're trying to honor the spirit of that agreement. And there was a huge capital infusion done at the time to put the pipeline through, and once the water goes south of Poplar Side Road, it's no longer our responsibility. My understanding is we disinfect it, make sure it's clear and drinkable, and once it leaves that border, it's up to New Tecumseh to get it from there to their faucets. So it is not a simple issue, but it's one we've been working hard to work forward with over the last 4 years, and this is a good step. So thank you for this report, and this is good news. So having said all that, unless there's any more comments, I will call the vote. All those in favor? That is passed unanimously. Are there any public delegations? Seeing none, I think we'll move on. Other business. I'm going to pass this over to Clerk Almus to take us through some meeting procedure review. Sarah?
To be quite frank, we've been very busy, and I almost forgot that this was on the agenda. However, it's very timely because we had a detailed discussion this morning at our department heads as well, so we can reiterate the same messaging as well as the orientation that we provided to the BIA board. So starting, I'm just going to go over a few real key issues. Staff we actually have a script together to put together a video that shows, proper procedure and improper procedure that we would like to put on our YouTube channel as well, that will help deputants. But in the meantime, I think it'll be a valuable review for council's information on proper decorum and procedures at council, and we'll touch on a few of the conflict of interest pieces. So the procedural bylaw, so the chair or the mayor obviously is responsible for presiding over the meetings and maintaining the order and decorum. They make decisions with respect to points of order and points of personal privilege, what we'll get into the next slide. The chair or the mayor has the ability to vote, and they have the ability to debate on all matters. It is recommended that they do relinquish their right to of their position of chair to the vice chair or the vice mayor, or sorry, the deputy mayor during any sort of debate. However, they do resume the position of the chair when calling for the vote on a question. So this is the duties of members, and this is straight from our procedural bylaw. So it reminds members that you are responsible to do your necessary preparation for your meetings, including the review of the agenda and all the background information that's provided. To speak only to the subject matter that is under debate, to vote on all motions before council or committee unless prohibited from voting by law, to observe proper procedure and decorum at all meetings, to state questions to be asked through the chair. So this here is a valuable conversation as well, is in the event that members of council or the committee are unsure who the question should be going towards, or whether it should be staff or another member of council, the question always goes through the chair. So if you're unsure, the chair will put the question to the appropriate member. So remember that when you are addressing each other, obviously you're using your appropriate council terms, and again, vice versa for staff, that staff are addressed through their director position roles as well. And again, you're responsible to attend all the committee and council meetings and board meetings that you have been appointed to, and that is part of your member responsibilities. So on to the next slide. So these are some of the issues that we'll address today. So again, I just spoke to addressing council, committee, and staff. Notice of motions. So a notice of motion can be provided either at the council table or in advance of a meeting. So notice of motion, again, would happen actually at a council meeting rather than a committee meeting, because council has the ability to make the formal decision on a matter. The purpose of a notice for a motion to come forward is to ensure that all members have the ability to have time to contemplate and do their due diligence in deciding on how they're going to vote on a matter. There may be some instances that come up during a council meeting that you have the ability to waive a notice of motion provision. So if there is something that is apparent and members of council want to make the decision immediately, council can choose to waive the notice of motion provision. However, you do require 2/3 majority vote to waive the notice of motion, and then the next order of business that you would discuss would be the motion that you would be deciding on. So again, the difference between a motion is a decision that hasn't been decided. Once the vote is called, the decision is known, it becomes a resolution. Amendments versus severing. So all motions that come forward, members have the ability to put forward amendment. An amendment does require a seconder. In a procedural bylaw, we do set out that if an amendment is requested, the chair will put aside the request for the amendment until all members are able to speak to the original motion, and then the amendment would be put forward by the chair if seconded by another member. We deal at this council through a procedural bylaw with only one amendment at a time, so you can't have amendments to amendments to amendments, which procedurally could happen with other assemblies or other bodies. Reconsideration, again, council can reconsider a matter once within a fiscal year, and you can reconsider a matter if you have 2/3 of a majority vote. So again, this will be something that will be coming up Monday night. There was an item that was on the agenda that does require reconsideration. It didn't require reconsideration at the committee level because the committee level didn't decide on that, the amendment, and this is reflective. Actually, the example is the Pretty River Academy staff report. So once it comes forward to council, since council concluded that negotiation and that sale based on a condition, council will have to reconsider that vote. And when you do a reconsideration, the vote that comes forward first is strictly a vote confirming that you're interested in doing the reconsideration. So the majority, or 2/3, can vote to reconsider the motion, but you still may vote the same way that you voted previously. So it doesn't change, you do not have to change how you vote, you just agree that there might be new information available that has come about that you would like to provide the body with an extra opportunity to reconsider that matter. Basically that's a process for reconsideration. Again, in camera meetings, we do have our new provision, as you've seen at the last council meeting, that we have included in there that it has been vetted by staff, so myself, I review the merits of the item that's to be discussed in camera. I have to determine if that meets one of the exemptions in the Municipal Act. We do have a meeting a week prior to the council meeting to review the agenda with our CAO and the mayor, and we have a further opportunity to review that. But regardless, if there is an in-camera meeting on the agenda, you see what the subject matter is. If a member of council or committee has a concern about that item and whether that should be an in-camera conversation, by all means, come to staff. So most likely myself, the deputy clerk, or our CAO, express your concerns and ask why that meeting is in camera. We will let you know, and you can also ask the question at the table, so then if you think that the public might have concerns why it's going in camera, it gives them a little bit of reassurance as well to know that information. point of order. So if during a meeting at any time, council believes that the procedural order is not being followed, you may speak and request a point of order. The chair is the one that decides on all points of order. If the chair makes a decision, the decision is final unless a majority want to appeal the decision. So members say, if the mayor or deputy mayor, whoever's chairing the meeting, rules on a point of order, you are still not comfortable with that, you may appeal it, and it becomes a majority decision of council whether that point of order is upheld. Point of order versus a point of personal privilege. A point of personal privilege is when you believe that either your own personal integrity has been impunged or you believe council's integrity has been impunged. You may call for a point of personal privilege. Again, the mayor is the one that decides on all matters of points of personal privilege. If the mayor or the chair believes that the integrity has been impunged of an individual or of council, the mayor or the chair will request that an apology is made. If an apology has not been made, the mayor has the ability to make the member or the deputant, whoever it is that has called the integrity of an individual or council into question, may request them to vacate the council chambers or the meeting room. Speaking to matters, you are required to speak to matters. Everybody has the opportunity to speak to matters only once, unless you require an explanation. It is the mayor's responsibility and obligation to limit speaking to a matter to only once, unless there is a need to seek further clarification. However, the mayor may, for the process of the decision-making purposes and eliminating ongoing discussion, the mayor may decide on the matter and call the vote. Motions to refer or defer. So if there is ever, if you do not feel that you have the information to make a decision on a matter, you have the ability to request that the motion be deferred to, number one, either later in the meeting or deferred to a later date. You can also request a motion be referred back to staff or committee. And we request, if you do that, then the council will debate the motion to refer or defer. And if the motion is defeated, if you still are not comfortable with making a vote, if you do abstain, obviously that goes on record as a negative vote, and we are recording all individual votes on all significant matters throughout this council term. And requests for staff report. So this is an important subject. It is in our procedural bylaw that requests for staff reports can be made without notice of motion. The reason why this has originally been set up is that a request for a staff report isn't a final decision on a matter. So it can go back to staff. However, you still can request, you can still prepare a notice of motion that requests a staff report. So again, giving your colleagues the ability to have, understand where you're, a matter that you would like to see further detail, because staff reports, and as the CAO had mentioned earlier, if there is significant priorities that staff are dealing with, we need to make sure that staff reports are, focused on I guess, key areas and respect various timelines whenever there's other projects that are underway. I don't know if the CEO wants to add anything further to.
No, thanks, Laura, that's a good. The only comment I would make through your worship is that on the in-camera meetings, because I know this is a fairly sensitive topic, we have added a preamble to the agenda item, and this is another opportunity to communicate to the public and to members of council that we have carefully considered this item before placing it in camera. So in addition to the tests that the clerk puts this through, and then the mayor and I, when we meet for our agenda meeting, we also put another provision in the preamble to that agenda to confirm that this is indeed an item that is worthy of consideration in camera. So this is not a decision that we take lightly, but we also need to make sure that we respect the provisions of the Municipal Act, that the exemptions are complied with, and we're not compromising either our legal obligations or our contractual obligations or labor relations issues by bringing things prematurely into the public realm when it should be discussed in camera. So it's not taken lightly. It's carefully considered before we put an item on the in-camera folder.
Certainly, and further,
If I can, sorry, I'm gonna get you to back up and see if there's any questions dealing with the first slide, and I'll go around the table. Any questions on aspects of that? Deputy Mayor?
Sorry, reconsideration, is it a calendar year or fiscal year?
it's 12 months,
12 months from the date of
the
the,
first decision.
okay. And I'm hoping this doesn't happen, but if somebody abstains from voting, is that somehow recorded or does it just show up as a negative vote?
It shows up as a negative vote.
There's no asterisks denoting that, okay.
Questions? Yeah, Councilor McLeod?
There was some, I wonder if, through your merit, your worship, if Sarah could repeat what she was talking about regarding recorded votes, because I was under the impression that all votes are now recorded, and yet at our council meeting, the most previous one, we were called on for recorded votes, whereupon we stood up. And I remain confused about why we did that, since all votes are theoretically recorded.
Certainly. So clarification to that, they're all logged, so all votes are being logged, but an official recorded vote actually shows up in the minutes. So, you know, it shows a detailed box basically identifying exactly how every member voted. Again, parliamentary procedures show best practice. You know, you would end up with a 10-page set of minutes versus a 3-page set of minutes. You know, doing very important merit to that, because in the setup that we have in the iCompass portal, you can actually see how members have voted per each committee or council that they represent and how that vote happens. However, for significant items that you want to really draw attention to, that's when, and you think it's an important vote that should be acknowledged in the public, see firsthand how members of council voted, that's why we have the separation.
And if I could just add to that, since you're our county alternate, at the county there's a weighted vote on a recorded vote. So it actually changes the dynamic of a vote. As a show of hands, it's just each individual has one vote. But on a recorded vote, depending on the size of your municipality, the votes are weighted. So it will skew, it's not necessarily a 1-for-1. So recorded vote can have strategic role in both here, but more importantly at the county for that reason. Any other questions? Well, I have a few since I sit in the hot seat here. Just going back to the amendments, if an amendment is put on the floor, and if I don't get a seconder, then I can allow discussion to continue on the original motion.
Correct.
But if I do get a seconder, then we've got to deal with the amendment on the table, on the floor.
So if the debate has just opened on the main motion,
Yes.
And the first or second speaker says, I would like to make an amendment to this motion, they can state what they want to amend, and you can put that amendment to the side until everybody has a chance to speak on the original motion. Once everybody has a chance to speak on the original motion, then you can call upon the person making the amendment, restate what the amendment was, and ask if there was a seconder to that amendment. Then you deal with the amendment, and when you're dealing, I'm glad you brought this up again, once you're dealing with the amendment, you're dealing strictly with voting on that amendment. You're not dealing on the motion as amended at that time, so there is still 2 motions that are necessary. So you have to agree to the amendment, then you vote on the original motion as amended.
Okay. And then it's got versus severing up there. And my understanding is if we have a motion that has a number of items to it, anyone as of right can ask that we sever out any of those items and deal with them in separate motions.
Absolutely. So motion, a request, it's not a motion, it's a request to sever. So any member at any time, if there is a motion that's put forward that has different pieces or components to that motion, you can request that the motion be severed. There's not a seconder that's required, and the mover and seconder of the original motion remain the mover and seconder for each parcel that's severed.
Good, thank you. And second, or thirdly, I guess on a deferral, once a deferral is requested, is a debate allowed on the request for a deferral or not?
We allow debate on the deferral. We don't allow debate on a reconsideration motion.
And finally, just to state this for the record, my understanding is if there was to be an objection made or a point of order made about something I have said, then I would not be able to rule on that. I would have to pass off the chair then to the next in command to rule on that point of order.
Correct. Unless you're calling a point of order against something that the deputy mayor has done, then it would move to the next councillor.
Yes. So if the deputy mayor had made a point of order against me, I would have to go to Councillor McLeod to rule on it because we
Yes.
voted conflicted error.
Correct.
Sounds familiar. Okay, and you can, that's my questions on that, so take issue. Oh, sorry. Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just on a couple of the ones that you brought up. So with respect to amendments, you don't have to do that. It would be up to the chair in relationship to what the amendment is actually about.
But putting to the
Yeah,
side.
because you can discuss it as amended after anyway, and you would vote against the amendment if you had a problem with it as going to the original motion, I would think.
My understanding is it would depend when I get the seconder. If I ask for a seconder, then once the amendment's been seconded, it has to be dealt with. But if I push it to the side or the chair pushes it to the side, we can go around and continue to discuss the original motion and we'll come back to it.
Okay, I don't always see the benefit of that, but there's leeway on that. You can do it or not do it. It's not a must hold the amendment until everybody's
It's up to the
spoken
chair.
to.
I guess it really depends on how early on in the discussion, if the first person out of the gates wants to amend the motion, then there may be some merit in pushing that to the side and going around first.
Okay, and then my other question then was on debate is allowed on a deferral, but my understanding it's only debatable as to time. Not as to whether or not
The
you're going to
length of the
defer, but
deferral.
it's only the length of the deferral and.
I believe that was changed in our last one of our last procedural bylaw amendments. So we actually changed to include a deferral to a definite time and a deferral to a definite time and an indefinite time. When a question is under debate, no motion shall be received except for the following purposes and according to the following order, namely, and it provides the order in which they can be addressed. So we can take a look at it. Actually, these are some of the items too that we have been reviewing as well to ensure that we have a very efficient and effective meeting. So right now that's how we have it in the procedural bylaw, but you know, we can have a conversation too.
Okay, yeah, that's one I would question as well. Okay.
And maybe on the topic of amendments then, can you just discuss what a friendly amendment is?
So a friendly amendment is a terminology. If the amendment isn't something that's significantly altering the intent of the motion, and is generally accepted by all members. Again, a friendly amendment, we wouldn't call for a mover and seconder on it, but as long as the original mover and seconder were comfortable with that change.
Okay, great, thanks.
So again, effective meeting tips. These are some items that we do go over with our various advisory committees and boards. So obviously be prepared, do your research, require information in advance so that there's no surprises. So if you think that there's additional information that you have been provided with or you would like to know, make sure that you contact the appropriate department head. And generally that contact should be through the CAO when making that request. Requesting information in advance of the meeting doesn't restrict your ability to request that additional information at the meeting. So as long as it's basically giving a staff an opportunity to be prepared to address your question so that there is a more fulsome discussion at the table. Again, majority rules. We tell all of our committees and advisory committees, make sure you stick to your agenda, which council does a good job on. Decision making will be done fairly and impartially, and keep the discussion focused on the topic at hand. So sometimes we can see that once a report comes forward, it may trigger a conversation about a very similar related matter, but the focus should be on what the subject matter is.
Sorry, question, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So on that though, I think what we haven't touched on yet is the difference between committee and council. There's a lot more leeway in terms of committee and the discussion as to where we're doing the work versus the council meeting. Right?
If I can touch on that now, so the difference between a standing committee is a committee comprised of 5 members of council, and a standing committee does have the more informal flexibility to really debate an issue that's at hand. So you do have the ability to talk more than once regarding the matter and request further clarification or explanation. It still is the chair's responsibility to ensure that the decision-making process is maintained and that there is some sort of decorum and parameter around that discussion, so the discussion doesn't go around in circles. Also too, at the standing committee level, you do have the ability to have individuals that are present in the gallery or in the audience to come up to participate in the discussion that are not registered on the agenda, whereas at a council meeting, you are required to be registered on the agenda. The only time that we would allow someone to come forward to speak to something on a council agenda that wasn't listed would be through a majority vote and at the discretion of the chair. At the advisory committees, there's even a more flexible role there that we allow them to allow people to speak to matters when they come forward. However, if the discussion becomes disruptive on having the committee debate the merits of their business, the request would be to have that individual speak at the end of the meeting to ensure that the focus is on the business that's at hand, rather than spending a lot of time on items that most likely require further review and will be put back to a future committee meeting. So again, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, just to briefly touch upon it, again, its goals are to protect the public interest. The intent is to prohibit any member from having a pecuniary interest in a matter being considered from having involvement in the matter. So that means, again, pecuniary relates to a financial or monetary issue that comes forward, and there is a requirement to disclose in a situation in which a person has a private or personal interest sufficient to appear to influence the objective exercise of his or her duties. Our next slide addresses that there are 2 different conflicts that you need to disclose. It's either an indirect or direct and deemed interest of that of a parent, child, or spouse. So in our procedural bylaw, if you do have a conflict of interest, actually, let's see if it's actually, I'll get to it in my next slide. But we request that all members provide in writing any disclosure they have regarding a municipal conflict of interest conflict, and all members have to be cognizant that under our code of conduct, you also have the responsibility to remove yourself from the table if you have an interest that could involve a immediate relative or an immediate family member, and that includes, I think relative is actually the word, and it includes actually associates, employees, friends, So you have to ensure that you do not have even a perceived interest in a matter. And we'll get to, again, the Integrity Commissioner's role. So these are what you wouldn't require to declare under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So these are exemptions. So if by reason of you having a financial interest, which is an interest in common with electors in general, you wouldn't have to disclose an interest. And secondly, by reason only of an interest of a member which is so remote or insignificant in its nature that it cannot reasonably be regarded as likely to influence the member. And these are the requirements. So again, the duty to disclose. So you not only have to disclose that you have an interest and that interest exists, but you have to describe the general nature of that interest at the meeting publicly as well. This is the information that you will put in your written conflict form. In that conflict form, if you slip actually to number 5 on that slide, is available on our website on an online registry. And so you need to complete that form either before the meeting if you're aware in advance, or if you hadn't completed it shortly after the meeting, you're required to submit it to the clerk's office to be provided on this registry. Again, once you do declare that you have an interest, you shall not take part in the discussion or vote, and the member shall not influence the vote in any way, either before, during, or after the meeting. And if it's a closed meeting, the member must exit the meeting during that portion of the discussion. And just a reminder that if you do have a conflict, you are expected to actually leave the room when that conflict does exist. There was, within the last 3 years, it was actually case law where a member had disclosed a conflict, removed themselves from the table, but actually sat in the gallery, heckled the members of council, stared them down during the vote on various matters, and made a physical influence on how they wanted them to vote, and they were actually called upon it, and it was determined that he was actually in violation of the MCIA. And again, most importantly, I'm reiterating it because it's very important, but you should be seeking any sort of advice from our integrity commissioners. And again, this is something new that happened in Bill 68. So previous councils were not afforded with the opportunity to get free advice. Council members used to were responsible to seek their own legal advice on any sort of conflict. So that change that happened at the end of 2017 was very beneficial to members of council, and again, protecting the public interest.
If I can add to that, you cannot ask Sarah or the CAO or any town staff. You cannot ask anyone who's involved in the municipality. It's your responsibility, and you need to get independent advice.
That's correct. And again, so our integrity commissioner is through a joint retainer with the county of Simcoe and a number of member municipalities that are participating and we have retained integrity principals integrity, and these are their responsibilities. So it's again ensuring the application of codes of conduct for members of council and local boards. Though this was actually an important conversation I had with the BIA today, because this is the first time, effective March 1st, 2019, that local boards such as BIAs, including the Public Library Board, will be required to adhere to the Code of Conduct and could be investigated by the Integrity Commissioner. So it was a very important topic, and we're looking at having specific training from the Integrity Commissioner to come in to speak to our local boards as well. The application of procedures, rules, and policies governing ethical conduct, so any other procedure rule that you may have, and that could include our harassment policies, any policies that council is responsible to adhere to. They could apply their powers to investigate. Again, you can request advice under the Code of Conduct. You can request advice from them about ethical behaviors. You can request advice from them regarding your obligation under the MCIA. And they also provide education training about codes of conduct in the MCIA. So council during their orientation did actually receive an introductory review of what their responsibilities are. And I think we'll be working closely with them over the next little while and ensuring that council's apprised of all your responsibilities, and if there's ever any question and you do want training in, make sure you let staff know, and we can see what we can arrange. So these are all pieces from the code of conduct. I won't get into detail. You've read it, you signed it during your inauguration, so you should know the preamble. The next slide. Again, the conduct of meeting. This basically reiterates what I addressed. It's also in the procedural bylaw about decorum, but this also indicates about your showing respect and courtesy during the meetings, ensuring that you're not using electronic equipment, that is limited for use and access for meeting purposes only. Next slide.
Stop you there, Sarah. So just the use of electronic equipment in the course of an open meeting, but also more particularly in an in-camera session where confidentiality is a big issue, and I'm wondering if we should be considering just a ban of handhelds in our in-camera sessions, just out of an abundance of caution. So you can bring in your computers, but I would ask that council members not bring in your phones to an in-camera session. Sorry, Councillor Doherty, yeah.
Thank you, and I have been thinking about the handheld devices as well, even during open council meeting, and it seems to me that there is no purpose really to have your phone during council meeting. Whatever information you need, you either have printed or it's on the town supplied electronic device. And it seems to me that having a phone also opens up a member to being unduly influenced or having a third party actually participating in a meeting through them. Not to say that it would happen, but it could happen. And so I would be very supportive of the notion of not permitting phones to be at either closed or open meetings.
Maybe that's something we can look at and talk about. I mean, I guess there may be a use to Google information relative to a subject that's on the floor, but I certainly understand your concerns, and that's something that we can look at as a council, I think. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I think there are some limited cases in terms of family situations. I have had a couple in the 4 years where I needed to be monitoring and did require just to have it there to check that. But other than that, I agree. There's really no need to be. As a matter of fact, I thought at least one term of council I served on, the ability to contact was disconnected. We didn't have the ability to do that. Somehow it was done as a.
I think that's when they only had rotary phones.
No, yeah. Anyway, I'm just saying there is some kind of limited.
I think it's something that we should probably discuss around the table because I think it's a valid concern.
Certainly, through the chair, that has been a topic of discussion in the past on a couple occasions, and the reasons why it is, this is actually the wording as well, I believe, in our procedural bylaw. We put that it's limited for use, limited use, because the concept had come up about, I think there might have even been a notice of motion to restrict all use at that point, and the issue of, if it's needed for, emergency purposes, that you have access to it, but the intent is that you're not corresponding with a member of the public about an item that you're debating. So maybe there's some parameters we can put around that to show some sort of sense of sensitivity to that issue, I guess.
I think staff will take that under advisement and we'll move forward with that.
And actually that goes into this very next slide about the transparency and openness in decision making. So members will conduct and convey council business in an open and public manner so that the process, logic, and rationale which were used to reach conclusions and decisions are available to all stakeholders. So this goes for that example as well, but this also speaks to that members of council, you're welcome to have a conversation amongst yourselves independently. If you have a question about a motion that's coming forward, that someone's put forward a notice of motion on, that you seek clarity. However, you shouldn't be collaborating and coming up with your the logic and rationale and then having it pre-decided before you come to a council meeting. You need to have an open mind when you come to the council table, and make that decision and use that logic and rationale whenever you're asked if you want to speak to the motion, and use that and explain the reason why you've come up with that decision making, your decision on the various matters. Next slide. Gifts and benefits, again, this is a reminder that you are responsible for disclosing on a statement if you've received a gift or benefit in excess of $200 over a 12-month period. So it could be a single occasion or it could be an accumulative amount. And again, you are not to receive a gift or benefit that exceeds a maximum of $500.
Form is also available online.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just ask a question on that?
Yeah, Councillor Hammond.
Our own code of ethics, I thought it said you can't receive any gift. Because, yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
I'll
Because I returned a gift at Christmas.
okay.
Yeah.
I'll just clarify that, but I believe that is still the case. Regardless, I'll provide clarification.
Thank you.
At council if it's any different than that slide. I know that actually that should be factual. This was actually the principal's integrity slide. So regardless if it is any different, I will let you know. Also in the code of conduct, professional development, it actually is in our code that it is an obligation for you to pursue professional development opportunities. So that is why you provided an account and a budget for professional development opportunities that you should pursue. If there's anything in specific that you would like to receive some more training or education on, make sure you bring it to the CAO's attention, and staff would be happy to explore various opportunities to get that training for you. Public input, this was actually one of the latest inclusions to the Code of Conduct, and this reiterates council's responsibility and commitment to the public, to seeking opportunities to have public engagement in various items throughout your decision-making processes. So we've had a great discussion tonight on 3 items that are coming up very significant: our budget, our community-based strategic plan, and the use of proceeds. So again, that's ensuring that the public will be involved, and we have that in the code to ensure that commitment and the public is aware of that. Next slide. Implementation. Again, it is your responsibility to ensure that you review the code of conduct regularly, as well as your procedural bylaw, and as previously noted, that you have signed the code of conduct during your inaugural induction into council this term. Next slide. Speaking with the media. I thought this is an important slide to include. The mayor shall report on all matters in the first instance to the media and the community. However, all members have the ability to speak to the media and speak to the community. However, members do not speak on behalf of council. It is the mayor that speaks on behalf of council. The difference between the mayor's responsibilities as well, unfortunately the mayor is restricted to speaking only in support of the democratic vote that happened. It is their duty to uphold and promote the purposes of the town and council's decisions. So again, if for some reason Mayor Saunderson is conflicted in a motion, the deputy mayor would be responsible to ensure that communication when speaking to the public and the community is strictly regarding the council's decision. And I think that's our last slide.
And I guess just one question then. So it's my role as the head of council. I cannot express a contrary opinion to a decision of council once it's been made. Council members would hopefully respect the wisdom of the decision and the process, but they can indicate whether or not they support it.
Correct. Yes, it is in the code of conduct that you are to respect the democracy of the vote. However, you can state the reasons why you didn't agree with the vote.
I have 3 questions of clarification. Number 1 is, if it's brought to a member's attention that a vote took place, and then after the fact they were in clear conflict of interest for whatever reason, but we're not aware of it, what's the process to state that conflict?
Certainly, that the timeframe is actually 6 weeks. So if you become aware that you've actually voted on a matter and you realize all of a sudden that you shouldn't have voted on the matter, at the next meeting of council, you should declare that you believe that you've inappropriately voted on that matter, and it should go on record. It actually is indicated, I believe that's in our code of conduct as well. I believe it's best practice, regardless if it's a significant decision and you voted on the matter. I think it is always good to be conservative and still note that you had no idea that you had a conflict at that time. And I think it's a good practice to be open and transparent about that if you're aware of it.
But it does not remove your vote. The vote stands. You're just declaring the fact that you voted when you had a conflict.
That's correct.
Question number 2 is the $200 for the gift. Is that when you say collective over a period of time, is that from one individual, or is that $200 cumulative from any form?
From one individual,
One individual.
company or organization, correct.
And the last question I had was, there was a question that was raised by I think a couple of us at the outset, specific to dollars and cents being reallocated, and that was the I'm going to call it the jacket fund from previous councils, whether that could be allocated to, what's the word I'm looking for?
Your personal professional development.
Thank you,
Yes.
which clearly I need. Yes, professional development, that's what I'm looking for. Yes. Yeah. Was there ever any further discussion on that matter?
Yes, I think that is. The question on it, we had a limit of up to $300 for the purchase of a blazer for your crest, and you would be reimbursed out of your professional development.
Sorry, that reimbursement didn't come out of your professional development.
No, the question was, could we allocate it? I don't think any of us.
Oh,
Purchase
towards
development.
your
Yeah.
professional development. I know that question has come up. I don't know, a decision hasn't been
Okay, that's fine.
been resolved.
We need to bring a motion.
Motion to,
This question?
not yet. Okay, not yet. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Doherty.
I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to confirm. What if a member of council is aware that another member of council was conflicted when they voted on a particular matter? They know for a fact, but
It's personal obligation is my understanding, but I'm going to hand it on. Okay.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, the obligation is on the member, and the member has to decide whether or not he or she is in a conflict. I mean, it's not up to another member to uphold that principle.
I guess ultimately though, if you felt strongly about the situation and it was material, you could make a complaint to the integrity.
Yes, you can use other means to redress that issue, but the obligation is clearly on the individual who is involved. But as the mayor said, you could file a complaint with the integrity commissioner, or you could raise it in other forum, but at the end of the day, it's that member's obligation.
Go ahead.
The Chair, I'll further note too, this conversation came up this morning at our BIA discussion, and generally, it was actually the consensus of the board, or within the discussion that I may not even be aware that I have a conflict, and I would appreciate if you told me if you thought that I had a conflict to bring that to my attention, because now that we know that we're going to be investigated under, the integrity commissioner, I would like to know. So generally for boards and committees, we advise that you should have, if you believe strongly, you can bring it to staff's attention, and then staff can advise that question has been brought up, but regardless, it is that member's responsibility to declare, feel satisfied in participating in that conversation. So it again depends on how comfortable you feel. You don't want to obviously create any sort of animosity amongst yourselves. So at the committee and board level, where it's been a little bit more informal, they felt a little bit more comfort level of kind of going through the staff person, so then the staff would kind of kindly reach out to that individual and say, you may have an interest with respect to this matter, however it's your obligation to decide. So they may choose to participate in discussion, they may choose to contact the integrity commissioner, or that may be enough for them to think about it and actually declare an interest and relinquish themselves from the table in the vote.
I guess just to comment at the council table, I think it's awkward to put the staff in that position, so I think if you really strongly believe that, you should mention it to the member themselves, the council member themselves, you directly. I don't think it's fair to involve our staff because they shouldn't be involved in that scenario. And I think that was one of the findings actually in Ackland's decision on Mayor Ford. And staff can't be involved and they can't seek advice from the city solicitor. They've got to go through.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? That was excellent. Thank you very much, Sarah. Very helpful. And at any point in time during the course of the meeting, Sarah, if someone has a procedural question, or I do, we can ask you.
So generally at first you have the ability as the chair to decide on the matter. And if there is a question and collectively you want to ask me, or if I see that there is something apparent that you're doing wrong, yes, I will definitely bring that to your attention.
Thank you. All right. Well, I think that's the agenda. So I will then look for a motion for adjournment. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. That's how I should remember your name. Okay, that's it for tonight. Thank you very much, everyone.